It's your international headline story this morning. 1/3 of the Senate and the whole House of Representatives is up for grabs as Joe Biden faces his biggest electoral test since the 2020 presidential vote. So Americans cast their final ballots in the closely fought elections that will determine whether Republicans win control of Congress. Let's give you a snapshot of what's unfolding in that country. Voice of America White House correspondent Anita Powell joins us via our video link this morning. Anita, good morning. It's great to see you. The maths make sense, right? Because Republicans need to flip, as I understand it, just 5 seats in the House to regain control.
It's extremely tight right here in the legislature in the United States, and we are seeing that right now. The results are still too close to call, but we are seeing that the trend seems to be that the Republicans might well pull through in the House of Representatives, the lower house, with a slim majority. But the Senate, the upper house, is still too close to call.
Yeah, I think it's 42 Democrats, 44 Republicans at the moment.
I'd hesitate to say that because that's changing by the minute, but yes.
Yeah. So what does this mean, Anita, if indeed Republicans have control of the Senate and of the House? What does that mean?
Well, it's not clear that they are, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. But if they are, President Biden was asked this, I believe, last night at the White House. He said he was optimistic that Republicans would not get control of the Senate. Remember, they actually need 51 seats, not 50, and that's because of this lovely quirk of Americana, whereby there is a 51st vote in the Senate. That's the vice president, and she is, of course, solidly Democratic. So in order for Republicans to actually push anything through the Senate, they would actually need more than 51.
Right.
And that doesn't look apparent right now. As for the House, it's the lower chamber. The Senate would still have power to put, that check on their powers. So this is par for the course, I think, in American politics. I know it seems very contentious from where we are, from where you are in South Africa, but this is how we roll these days in the United States. Very tightly divided, very passionate.
Very polarized, Anita.
Very polarized, very polarized. And of course, while there are concerns about that, this is, some pundits say that having this tight balance of power in effect actually stops anybody from getting too much power and from pushing through their agenda too thoroughly. So there's that theory as well.
I mean, if this is a referendum on Joe Biden's term in office so far, his approval rating, I think, is in the 40s, percentage-wise. What are some
dipped below the 40s recently, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some of the big swing issues? Because there are those bread and butter issues, right? The high cost of living for many Americans. And on the other side of that, issues like abortion.
Right. So the issues that many voters were thinking of as they went to the polls today in the U.S. or, as you mentioned, the economy. We've seen about 8% inflation here in the U.S. That's very difficult for a lot of American families. Also, reproductive rights. And I should note, and this is an interesting indicator, reproductive rights, aka abortion, was on the ballot in 5 states. And so far, it does appear that all 5 of these states, which lean both ways, are poised to vote in favor of reproductive rights, as in pro-choice rather than pro-life. So we are seeing that trend in the United States. So that seems to be overriding sort of the partisanship. We're also seeing some interesting trends on the economy has become an issue for the Republican campaign largely because inflation is such an easy target, of course, to hit the ruling party with, to say, things cost more. That's all your fault. And the Biden administration says that inflation is transitory, that we're not going into recession, and so on and so forth. But the president has been very clear and said that he doesn't believe this is a referendum on his performance so much as a choice. The way he's framing it is as a choice between, peaceful transitions of power and democratic values, which he says that his party represents, and what we've seen from the right wing of the Republican Party, which we saw on January 6th, which has been characterized many different ways, so I hesitate to characterize it, but it has been tinged by violence. I think that needs to be said.
I mean, as we wait for these results to trickle in, and you're obviously keeping a close eye on those numbers, what are the states that you're watching in particular?
Right now, Pennsylvania and Georgia, these are two very different states, but they both have very, very tight Senate races that are still in play very much. These are the two seats that could really flip the Senate one way or the other. And we also have very interesting candidates in these two states. Just very quickly, in Georgia, it's the incumbent who is basically the inheritor of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s church. He's the preacher at Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s church in Atlanta, and he's against a former football star, an American football star, who's Republican, and it's a very tight race. And then in Pennsylvania, we have the former lieutenant governor who recently had a stroke, and somebody you may have heard of, his name is Dr. Mehmet Oz. He was on the Oprah Winfrey Show as a doctor, and he's running on the Republican side. So these are two races that we're watching very closely because these are big, important states, but also these two Senate races really do count. And we're not expected to know the results, especially from Pennsylvania, for a few days because of this. And the thing I think I really want to emphasize, Michelle, is that we're not looking at one election here. We are looking at 50 different elections because states run their own elections. They have their own rules and their own quirks. So it might be easier for you to think of this as 50 different elections happening at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as we wait for the finalization of these elections, you're saying states like Georgia might take still a few days to finalize those numbers. It's all in the build-up to Trump's so-called big announcement next week. How do we read that?
I wonder what that could be.
Yeah,
no idea what that could be. I jest, of course. The crowd in Ohio, when he said that, clearly took that in the context in which he presented it, which was the expectation that he might announce another run for president on November 15th, which interestingly is a day after the deadline expires for him to respond to a subpoena from the January 6th committee in the Senate. So he's obviously watching this, and I just want to note one thing that might be of interest to the former president is how easily and quickly his main rival in the Republican Party, that's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, how quickly he sailed to victory in Florida, and by such a large margin, which could be seen to give the former president pause, because the two are just really the two stars in the Republican Party right now. And the fact that DeSantis did so well so quickly might be seen as threatening by Donald Trump.
Anita Powell, let me thank you for your time this morning. Thanks for giving us a sense here in South Africa of what's unfolding in the U.S. midterms 2022. Anita is a Voice of America White House correspondent.